New data says that a number of Latin American cities are actually safer than many U.S. cities. Here's which ones. This data was put together by a company called Latino Metrics, and if you want to learn about South America and the economies there, you should definitely follow Latino Metrics. And what they're showing is the latest homicide rates of a number of Latin American cities versus a number of U.S. cities. I think homicide rates are an interesting way to compare. If you wanted to go and live, or at least spend part of your time living somewhere else, how safe will you be? Petty crime can happen anywhere. It happens in a number of European cities that people feel are much safer, but actually aren't. The biggest risk for me is, of course, physical safety. Am I going to have my head chopped off with a machete? And those rates are going down dramatically in much of Latin America, while rates in some parts of the U.S. are going up. So let's look at homicide rate per 100,000 people. Way up at the tippy top, Philadelphia. Looks like things are totally out of control there. I've got friends in Chicago, friends near the Philadelphia area saying, we don't go downtown. We do not... We just don't leave the suburbs. That says something about those cities. Now we go to Las Vegas, the entertainment capital of the world. Higher homicide rate than many of these Latin American cities. Minneapolis, the same thing. Dallas, the same thing. People are moving to Texas, right? People who are leaving California, leaving Washington, leaving Massachusetts, leaving Illinois, going to states like Texas. I've often said they'd be better off going to another country. They would have lower taxes. It sounds like have more physical safety as well. Now, Denver comes in next, and Bogota, Colombia, where I happen to have a pied-à-terre, comes in right around the same levels. You have seen homicide rates in this century drop by more than half in Bogota. A lot of folks have gone to Colombia, having heard about it here on Nomad Capitalist. And if you go back to the days of Pablo Escobar, which is where many people's opinions are still based, yes, things were not so good then. But you can now go to some of the exact same places where Pablo Escobar was running around, and they are tourist attractions. They have been made safe. They've been sanitized. People are living in not only Bogota, Medellin. I was in Cali about a year and a half ago. Not as much my favorite. Some people are on the coast. Again, not as much my favorite. But there are cities you can live, and that's right on par with Denver. The rate has come dramatically down. Next, we go to San Antonio and Miami. Again, Miami, Florida. People are moving there. Prices have gone through the roof. You may have no state tax in Miami if you're an American, but you're still paying the high federal taxes. If you were to leave the country, there are plenty of places. You can go to Puerto Rico. You can go to places in Latin America, and you can dramatically lower your tax bill, not just the state tax, but the federal tax with proper tax planning. But Miami is tied with Mexico City. So Mexico City had kind of a bump up in 2018. And then it has come down looks like about 40 to 50% in just the last couple years. Nomad Capitalist Live 2022 was in Mexico City. People said, we feel incredibly safe in this neighborhood, which is kind of the lesson, by the way. My friend who lives in Chicago, for example, or the friend who lives the outskirts of Philadelphia, they don't view themselves as living in the city. They view themselves as living in those suburbs. And so you would not move to Bogota and live in a neighborhood that you wouldn't live in where you're from now. I mean, you're going to choose the same good neighborhood where you move that you would live in now. And so obviously that makes a difference. Where we were in Mexico City for Nomad Capitalist Live made a difference. There are, of course, parts of Mexico City that are more dangerous than Polanco, more dangerous than Lomas. There are parts of Bogota that are more dangerous where I live, a little bit further up north. And so you can obviously increase these chances even better, the same way that you would say, hey, I live in Philadelphia and I'm not having my head chopped off. Well, the same applies to where you would move. But Miami and Mexico City are now tied. And, what's interesting to me is someone had a great quote that there was a group of folks going down for an event to Bogota. And they said, hey, listen, one of you may have your wallet stolen or something. I mean, if you're going to the wrong part of town, if you go downtown to the center, maybe something small happens to you. And if that happens, you will blame Bogota. But it also happens in New York, it happens in Los Angeles, it happens in Chicago, and you blame the person in that city, not the city. Somehow when we go overseas, oh my God, this place is chaotic, it's terrible. And it's just a person at the end of the day, but we look at it differently. And so that's what I think these statistics are important for. Let's keep going. Los Angeles, by the way, is at the same rough level of Mexico City as well. Let's keep going down. Honolulu, one of the most difficult places to live the past couple of years, crazy high taxes. It is around the same level as New York City and Boston. And what other places are there? Sao Paulo, Brazil. Brazil has gotten a lot of attention, even back at the Olympics. Oh, it's in terrible shape. Obviously, that was about Rio in general, but Sao Paulo, you've seen homicide rates drop by more than 80% this century. They are now at the same level as New York, where admittedly, all kinds of crime is going unpunished there, but homicide rates, as I know, this century have still gone down. Boston, Honolulu, Sao Paulo has come to meet them with an 80% drop. So you're seeing dramatic improvements in some of these Latin American places. Who else meets them there? Santiago, Chile, one of the most boring cities in Latin America. And I think Chile is going the wrong direction. I've said that for years, and we're seeing more and more evidence of that, and that's becoming more and more widespread. But they always had low crime. I happened to be there during the protests, and that was not pleasant. But who else are you seeing? Buenos Aires, that was never really that high up. So we've seen big improvements in places like Brazil, places like Colombia. We see continued lower levels in Buenos Aires. And so that is what happened in those places. And so Latin America is an interesting place for Americans in that, of course, you've got a huge block that speaks one language, with the exception of Brazil. And so if you speak that language or are willing to learn that language, you've got a huge place that you can go and do business, you can live in, you can move between them. I think Latin America is interesting for someone who's from North America and wants less culture shock. Obviously, Europe may have less culture shock as well, but if you believe in these up-and-coming countries, you can qualify in many Latin American countries for a residence permit just based on your income. And some of those do require you to live there in order to keep the residence permit, whether it's a certain number of days per year or a certain number of months, like 50%, like when you go to renew it in 3 years or whatever. But not all of them do. Now, if you're not going to live there, you may not qualify for citizenship the way that you would if you did live there. But if you just want to have your options open and you agree with me that residence permits are, number one, getting more expensive, number two, having more conditions attached for new applicants, and number three, in some cases are going away, then it's a good idea to get your residence permit now. There are even paper residences in Latin America where you go and get the residence. You don't need to live there full time, but you can qualify for citizenship. So if you understand that crime in Latin America, in many parts of it, has gone dramatically down, you can go and get residence in many cases by showing income. Okay, so in places like Chile, in places like Argentina, in places in Central America, show your income. Ecuador could be as little as like $800 or $900 a month in some countries. Other countries, it's a couple $1,000s a month. And in many cases, it can be, hey, here's my salary, here's my dividends for my business, or here's my pension. Most people who live in Western countries can qualify for residence in these places. And now you've got a residence permit. And so now you have that access, but not the obligation in many cases to live there before they make the conditions more difficult. In other countries like Colombia, for example, Brazil, you can make an investment in the lower six figures and you can get residence that way. Again, in some cases, you can work towards citizenship. And so now you have the opportunity to diversify some cash into other economies that have been growing. Colombia, real estate, for example, has done relatively well. Yields are much higher. Brazil, especially if you're timing it with these currencies being lower, you can potentially get some bargains that way. But in the currency, many of the prices in these places have gone up. So there's a personal diversification opportunity and there's an economic diversification opportunity, because one thing, besides the fact that parts of the Western world are becoming physically less safe, is they're certainly becoming economically less safe. Now, living in Colombia, Argentina, Chile, not necessarily a tax-friendly thing, maybe Chile short term. Countries like Panama, Nicaragua, parts of like Costa Rica, at least temporarily, can be more tax-friendly for permanent living. South America, I think, is more of a bolt hole where I want to make sure if something crazy happens, I've got a place to go. And since the commitment level to many of these countries is merely, here's my income, and I don't even have to invest anything, Mexico can also be on that list. They're pretty easy residences to get in terms of ease of qualifying. You don't have to dig into your pocket and be out of pocket to get these residences, okay? So Nomad Capitalist helps people get residence permits all around the world. We don't have a particular one that we recommend because everyone's situation is different. Everyone's needs are different. Everyone's goals are different. And so it's not like you call us and everyone gets Mexico, everyone gets Chile, everyone gets Brazil. We have access to all of them. I've spent far too many years building a list of lawyers who actually get the job done, which in Latin America can be difficult at times. And so we have the folks who get the job done for you, and we'll help you put together a plan. You want to lower your taxes by moving to these countries? Again, Panama, Central America can be good. Some people, what they do is they get a couple of these residence permits, and then they'll move around the countries, right, if they want to move. And then that can be tax-friendly. Or, again, you can just build a plan B and say, give me a couple of residence permits in these places that now I realize that they're more safe, right? Give me access. If something happens, it's not that far of a flight from the US or Canada that I've got a place to go and at least regroup, okay? If something crazy happens, maybe conditions where I'm living get worse, right? You can see here, I mean, why do you want to move to Miami or Dallas when they're actually less safe than some of these places and you're still paying federal tax to live there? So, having a Latin American residence permit or two in your back pocket is not a bad idea, whether you want to move or whether you don't. But that's a way that you can use the rise of Latin America to your advantage. We're not doing banking there. You can buy, there's maybe some potential investments there, but we're generally going there and we're living. We're keeping our finances separate, but it's relatively affordable to do that. And actually, it's a lot safer than you think.